The dust turned her spit red when she finally collapsed at the edge of the creek, her feet bleeding through canvas, so worn it barely qualified as shoes anymore. Lillian Owens had walked 30 miles through Oklahoma territory in the scorching August heat of 1885, and every single step had been agony incarnate. But she had made it far enough from her stepfather's ranch that he would never find her again, and that made every blister worth it. She dunked her face in the cool water, drinking greedily, not caring that her dark hair fell into the stream or that mud splattered across her already filthy dress. The creek ran clear and cold, fed by springs that kept it alive even in the brutal summer drought. When she finally lifted her head, gasping, she saw him standing 20 feet away on his horse, watching her with an expression that was neither threatening nor pitying, just observing with the quiet patience of someone who spent most of his time alone. He sat tall in the saddle, this stranger, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek stones. His hat shadowed most of his face, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the way his shoulders held steady despite the lazy stance of his body. He wore worn leather chaps over dusty trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and boots that had seen better days but still looked infinitely more functional than the shredded fabric hanging off her feet. "You running from something or toward something?" His voice carried across the space between them, low and measured, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas before drifting north. Lillian pushed herself to standing, ignoring the way her feet screamed in protest. She was 19 years old, and she had learned young that showing weakness to strange men was a mistake that could cost everything. Neither, just walking. 30 miles in those. He nodded toward her feet, and she instinctively tried to hide them behind her skirts, which was pointless given how torn and bloody they were. They held up fine enough. Pride made her voice sharp, defensive. She had nothing left but pride, and she would be damned if this cowboy with his intact boots and well-fed horse would take that from her too. He dismounted in one smooth motion, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, maybe 23 or 24, with the kind of lean muscle that came from hard work rather than excess. His face was weathered but handsome in a rough-hewn way, all angles and sun lines around his eyes. Name's Lucas Ashford. I work the cattle ranch about 5 miles west of here. Good for you. She did not offer her own name, just crossed her arms over her chest and tried to look like someone who had not just walked through hell in shoes that had given up pretending to be protective about 20 miles back. Lucas studied her for a long moment, then did something that made her heart stutter in her chest. He sat down right there in the dirt and started pulling off his boots. They were well-worn brown leather, scuffed and faded but solid, the kind of boots that could carry a person through another 100 miles without complaint. He set them carefully beside him and then stood up, barefoot in the red Oklahoma clay. "What are you doing?" The question came out sharper than she intended, confusion making her voice rise. "You need these more than I do." He picked up the boots and walked toward her, moving carefully like she was a spooked horse that might bolt. "Creek's cool enough to keep my feet from burning, and I only got 5 miles to get home. You look like you got a lot farther to go. I cannot take your boots." The words were automatic, bred from years of being taught that accepting charity made you weak, made you obligated. But her feet throbbed with every heartbeat, and the thought of putting those bloody rags back on made her want to cry. "Sure you can. Already took them off, and I would look pretty foolish putting them back on now." He held them out, close enough that she could smell the leather, see the careful stitching that had repaired a split seam near the ankle. "Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can give them back once you get wherever you are going and get yourself sorted out." Lillian looked from the boots to his face, searching for the catch, the hidden price that would come with this kindness. She had learned that men did not give things away for free, especially not to young women with no family and no prospects. But his creek stone eyes held nothing but genuine concern, and maybe something else she could not quite name, something warm that made her chest tighten. "Why would you do this?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, almost fragile. "Because somebody ought to." He pushed the boots into her hands, and the leather was still warm from his feet, soft and worn smooth on the inside. "And because I got a sister about your age, and I would hope if she was in trouble somewhere, someone would help her too." The comparison to his sister should have been reassuring, but instead it made something twist in her stomach, though she could not have said why. She took the boots, her fingers closing around the worn leather, and felt something crack in her chest, some wall she had built up over years of learning to expect nothing from anyone. "Thank you." The words felt rusty coming out, like she had not said them in so long she had forgotten how they tasted. "My name is Lillian Owens." "Well, Miss Owens, you planning on staying in Tulsa long?" He stepped back, giving her space, his bare feet settling into the red dirt like they belonged there. "I do not know yet. I have never been there before." She sat down on a flat rock near the creek and started unlacing what was left of her shoes, trying not to wince as the fabric pulled away from raw blisters. "I heard they might be hiring at the hotel there for cleaning or kitchen work." "They might be. Mrs. Patterson, who runs the Tulsa hotel, is always complaining about needing help." He crouched down by the creek, letting the water run over his hands, politely not watching as she revealed the full damage of her journey. Town's growing fast with the railroad talks and all the cattle drives coming through. Lots of people passing through means lots of work. She eased her feet into his boots, and despite the fact that they were too big, they felt like heaven compared to what she had been wearing. The leather cradled her damaged feet, and though it hurt to stand, it was a bearable hurt, not the sharp agony of before. "These are too nice. I feel like I am stealing from you. Cannot steal what's freely given." He stood up, water dripping from his fingers, and gave her a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Besides, I got another pair back at the ranch. These were my working boots, not my Sunday best." "You are either the kindest man I have ever met or the strangest." She took a few experimental steps, feeling how the boots moved around her smaller feet but held firm enough to keep her steady. "Maybe both." His smile widened just a fraction. "You want to ride into Tulsa?" "My horse can carry double, and you should not be walking anymore today. Not with your feet torn up like that." Every instinct told her to refuse, to keep her distance from this man who had already been kinder to her than she knew how to handle. But her feet were screaming, and Tulsa was still another 7 miles according to the sign she had passed an hour back, and she was so tired she could barely think straight. "If it is not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." "Gives me an excuse to stop by the general store, pick up that tobacco my boss has been asking me to get for a week now." He moved to his horse, a sturdy bay mare with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition, and swung himself up into the saddle with easy grace. Then he reached down toward Lillian, his hand extended. "Come on up. Daisy here does not mind the extra weight." Lillian had ridden horses before, back when her mother was still alive and things were different, but it had been years. She took his hand, feeling the calluses rough against her palm, and let him pull her up behind him. The saddle was not made for two, so she had to sit close, her arms wrapping around his waist to keep from falling. She could feel the heat of him through his shirt, Smell the mixture of leather and sweat, and something clean like soap. Hold on tight now." His voice carried a note of amusement, like he could feel her trying to maintain some space between them, even though it was physically impossible. Daisy walked smooth, but better safe than sorry. The horse started moving at a gentle walk, following the creek line before turning toward the well-worn trail that led to Tulsa. The motion was rhythmic and soothing, and Lillian found herself relaxing despite her determination to stay alert. Up close like this, she could see the sun-bleached tips of his brown hair where it curled just past his collar, the strong line of his shoulders, the way his hands held the reins with confident ease. "So what are you running from?" He asked the question casually, like he was inquiring about the weather, but she felt the weight of it settle between them. "What makes you think I am running? People do not walk 30 miles in shoes that are falling apart because things are going well." His tone held no judgment, just statement of fact. "And you got that look about you, like you are expecting someone to come dragging you back." Lillian was quiet for a long moment, watching the landscape roll by. Oklahoma Territory stretched out in all directions. Red earth and scrub grass and scattered trees that somehow survived the brutal summers. It was harsh land, unforgiving, but there was a kind of beauty in its stubbornness, the way it refused to be anything other than exactly what it was. "My stepfather. He wanted me to marry his business partner, a man 3 times my age who already buried 2 wives. When I said no, he locked me in the root cellar and said I would stay there until I came to my senses." She felt Lucas tense, his back going rigid under her hands. "How long were you down there?" 3 days. But I found a loose board and squeezed through, took what little money my mother left me that I had hidden and started walking." The words came easier than she expected, maybe because she could not see his face, or maybe because he had already shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. "That was yesterday morning. I walked through the night because I figured he would come after me during the day." "He will not find you in Tulsa." Lucas spoke with quiet certainty, the kind that came from someone who knew how to handle trouble. "It is big enough now that one person can disappear if they want to, and if he does come around asking questions, well, folks in Tulsa tend to mind their own business unless someone gives them reason not to. You seem to know a lot about it." "Been working ranches around here for 6 years now, ever since I was 17. Started in Texas, worked my way north, ended up at the Double Bar Ranch outside Tulsa about 2 years back. It is a good place, good people. Boss treats his workers fair, pays on time, does not ask too many questions about where a man comes from." He paused, then added, "Or where a woman comes from, for that matter." The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the red earth glow like embers. Lillian had not let herself think about what came after, about what she would do once she reached Tulsa beyond finding work and a place to sleep. The future felt like a vast empty space, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. For the first time in her life, no one was telling her what to do, where to go, who to be. She was completely alone, except for this stranger who had given her his boots and was carrying her towards something that might be freedom. "Why did you really help me?" She asked the question quietly, her voice almost lost in the sound of hoofbeats and the distant call of a hawk. "The truth, not the thing about your sister." Lucas was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I got a sister, that part is true, but I also know what it is like to need help and not get it. Know what it is like to be young and scared and have nobody who cares if you make it or not." His voice had gone rough, weighted with old pain. "I guess I just figured if I could make it a little easier for someone else, maybe that balances the scales some." That is a kind way to see the world. Maybe. Or maybe I am just too stubborn to believe it has to be every person for themselves all the time. He shifted slightly in the saddle, and she felt the movement ripple through him. We are almost there. You can see the buildings up ahead. Tulsa rose out of the prairie like an act of will, a collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets that somehow declared itself a town, despite the emptiness surrounding it. Lillian could see the main street stretching out, lined with a general store, a saloon, a hotel with a painted sign, a church with a white steeple, and various other establishments that marked the presence of civilization, however rough. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, cowboys and settlers and women in calico dresses, all going about their business in the golden evening light. Lucas guided Daisy down the main street, nodding to a few people who called out greetings. He seemed well known here, respected, and Lillian felt eyes following them, curious about the woman riding behind him. She straightened her spine, trying to look like someone who had not just walked 30 miles and accepted a stranger's boots, trying to look like someone who belonged. He stopped in front of the Tulsa Hotel, a 2-story building with a wide porch and windows that gleamed with lamplight. Mrs. Patterson is usually in the front office this time of day. She is tough but fair, and she does not tolerate nonsense from anyone, customers or workers. You tell her Lucas Ashford sent you, and she will at least give you a fair hearing. Lillian slid down from the horse, her feet hitting the ground with a dull throb that reminded her of every mile she had walked. The boots steadied her, kept her upright, and she looked up at Lucas still mounted, silhouetted against the sunset sky. I do not know how to thank you properly. You saved my life today, whether you believe that or not. Then do not thank me. Just promise me you will take care of yourself, get those feet looked at, and make something good of whatever comes next. He held her gaze, and in the fading light his eyes looked almost amber, warm and intense. And Miss Owens, you are stronger than you think you are. Anyone who walks 30 miles to get away from something they do not want is not someone who gives up easy. I will remember that. She wanted to say more, wanted to find words for the feeling blooming in her chest, but he was already turning Daisy back toward the general store, raising one hand in farewell without looking back. Lillian stood there for a moment, watching him ride away, this cowboy who had given her his boots and asked nothing in return. Then she turned toward the hotel, straightened her shoulders, and walked through the front door in borrowed leather and hard-won courage. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that could probably see through walls if she tried hard enough. She looked Lillian up and down, taking in the filthy dress, the 2 large boots, the general state of someone who had been through an ordeal, and her expression gave away absolutely nothing. Lucas Ashford sent me, Lillian said, lifting her chin. He said you might have work available. Did he now? Mrs. Patterson's voice was dry as the Oklahoma dust. And what makes you think you are suited for hotel work, looking like something the cat dragged through a dust storm? Because I am willing to work harder than anyone else you could hire, and I will not complain about the hours or the pay or the conditions. Lillian met her gaze steadily. I need this job, madam. I will not pretend otherwise, but I will earn every penny you pay me. Something shifted in Mrs. Patterson's face, not quite a smile, but close enough. Lucas Ashford is one of the few men in this territory with sense enough to come in out of the rain, so I will take his recommendation seriously. You can read and write. Yes, madam. My mother taught me before she passed. Good. I need someone who can do more than just sweep floors. The last girl I hired could not keep the guest ledger straight to save her life. She moved out from behind the desk, and Lillian could see she was shorter than she had seemed sitting down, but she carried herself like someone much larger. You will get room and board plus $3 a week. You work 6 days, Sundays off for church or whatever you want to do with your time. I expect cleanliness, punctuality, and discretion. What happens in this hotel stays in this hotel, understood? Yes, madam. Call me Mrs. Patterson. None of this madam business making me feel older than I already am. She walked toward a doorway that led deeper into the hotel. Come on then, let me show you where you will be staying. And for heaven's sake, we need to get those feet properly bandaged before they turn septic. The room was small, barely more than a closet with a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a door that locked from the inside and a window that looked out over the back alley. And to Lillian, it was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. It was hers, earned by her own determination, and no one could take it away as long as she kept working. Mrs. Patterson proved to be as tough as promised, but also surprisingly kind in practical ways. She brought bandages and salve for Lillian's feet, showed her where the kitchen was and told her to eat as much as she wanted, and gave her an old dress that was worn but clean and actually fit properly. By the time Lillian fell into bed that first night, she was exhausted beyond measure, but also filled with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The days fell into a rhythm quickly. Lillian woke before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the hotel guests, then spent her mornings cleaning rooms and changing linens, her afternoons managing the front desk and the guest ledger, and her evenings helping with dinner service. The work was hard and endless, but she had meant what she said to Mrs. Patterson. She worked harder than anyone else, stayed later, took on extra tasks without being asked, and slowly, steadily, proved her worth. Her feet healed, though she would always carry the scars of that 30-mile walk. She kept Lucas's boots in her small room, cleaned and oiled, a reminder of kindness when she had needed it most. She told herself she was keeping them to return to him eventually, but the truth was they had become something more than just boots. They had become a symbol of the moment her life changed direction. 2 weeks passed before she saw Lucas again. She was working the front desk on a hot afternoon, updating the ledger while trying to stay cool in the oppressive heat, when the door opened and he walked in, hat in hand, looking sunburned and dusty from the trail. Their eyes met across the lobby, and she felt her heart do something complicated in her chest, some combination of a skip and a lurch that left her slightly breathless. Miss Owens. He approached the desk with that same quiet confidence she remembered. You are looking considerably better than the last time I saw you. Thank you for noticing, Mr. Ashford. She tried to sound professional, businesslike, but she could not quite keep the warmth from her voice. And thank you again for your help. I am not sure I ever properly expressed how grateful I am. You got yourself a job and a place to stay. That is thanks enough. He leaned against the desk, and she could see his eyes were even more creek stone gray than she remembered, flecked with bits of green and gold. Actually, I came by to see if you still had my boots. I got my other pair resoled, so I do not need them back urgent or anything, but I figured I should at least ask. Of course, wait here. She practically ran to her room, grateful for the excuse to catch her breath and press her cool hands to her warm cheeks. When she returned with the boots, carefully cleaned and polished, he looked at them with surprise. You did not have to go to all this trouble. It was no trouble. They saved me, so the least I could do was take care of them properly. She set them on the desk between them, and the gesture felt weighted somehow, significant in ways she could not fully articulate. Lucas picked up the boots, running his thumb over the leather she had worked so carefully to restore. These look better than they have in years. You got a talent for this kind of work. I just paid attention to how my father used to care for his tack back before he died. The memory came with the usual ache, but time had dulled it to something bearable. He always said good leather was an investment worth maintaining. Smart man. Lucas set the boots back down, but he made no move to leave. So how are you settling in? Tulsa treating you well? Better than I had any right to expect. Mrs. Patterson is demanding but fair, and the work keeps me busy enough that I do not have much time to dwell on things. She paused, then added, I have not seen any sign of my stepfather, if that is what you are really asking. Cannot say it did not cross my mind. His expression went serious, protective. If he does show up, you let me know, or tell Mrs. Patterson. She has a shotgun behind that desk and is not afraid to use it. Despite herself, Lillian laughed. I believe it. She threatened to shoot a drunk cowboy last week who got handsy with one of the saloon girls staying here. That sounds like her. Lucas smiled, and the expression transformed his whole face, made him look younger and more open. Listen, I know this is probably forward of me and you can say no without worrying I will take it badly, but there is a church social this Sunday evening. Dancing and food and such. Would you want to go? With me, I mean. The question hung in the air between them, and Lillian felt time slow down, stretch out. She could say no, could keep her distance, could maintain the professional boundaries that would keep her safe from the risk of caring about someone. But she was so tired of being afraid, tired of protecting herself from possibilities. Lucas had shown her kindness without expectation, had helped her when she had nothing to offer in return, and maybe that was exactly the kind of person worth taking a risk for. I would like that very much. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Mrs. Patterson gives me Sunday evenings off. The smile that spread across his face was worth every moment of uncertainty. Good. That is real good. I will come by around 6 then if that suits you. That suits me fine. He picked up his boots, tucked them under his arm, and moved toward the door. But he paused at the threshold, looking back at her with an expression that was difficult to read, equal parts hopeful and cautious. I am glad you made it to Tulsa, Lillian Owens. Real glad. So am I, Lucas Ashford. She watched him leave, watched him walk out into the bright afternoon, and felt something shift in her chest, some door opening that she had thought permanently closed. Sunday came slower than any week in Lillian's memory, each day stretching out endlessly, despite the constant work. She scrubbed floors with extra vigor, changed linens with fierce efficiency, and caught herself staring out windows more than she cared to admit. Mrs. Patterson noticed, of course, because that woman noticed everything, but she said nothing beyond a knowing look and a comment about how Lucas Ashford was one of the good ones. When Sunday finally arrived, Lillian spent the afternoon preparing with more care than she had given to anything in months. She washed her hair in the basin, scrubbing until it shone, then braided it carefully and pinned it up in a style her mother had taught her years ago. The dress Mrs. Patterson had given her was plain calico, faded blue with small white flowers, but it was clean and mended and fit her properly, which was more than she'd had in a long time. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand and barely recognized the young woman staring back, someone who looked hopeful instead of hunted. Lucas arrived exactly at 6, wearing clean trousers and a white shirt that had clearly been pressed for the occasion, his hair still damp from washing. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers, the kind that grew along the creek beds, and when he handed them to her, his expression was almost shy. I know they are not much, but I thought you might like them. They are perfect. Lillian took the flowers, feeling the delicate stems against her palm, and meant it. Roses would have felt like too much, too formal, but these simple wildflowers felt honest, genuine, and that mattered more than any expensive bouquet ever could. They walked together through the early evening, the heat finally breaking as the sun descended. The church social was held in the yard behind the white steepled building, with lanterns strung between trees and tables laden with food that the town women had prepared. A small group of musicians sat on the church steps, playing fiddle and guitar, and couples were already dancing on the packed earth that served as a makeshift floor. Lucas introduced her to what felt like half the town, a dizzying array of names and faces that she tried desperately to remember. His boss from the Double Bar Ranch, a weathered man named Thomas Atkins who shook her hand with genuine warmth. The blacksmith and his wife. The general store owner. The school teacher, a young woman named Catherine who welcomed Lillian with enthusiasm and immediately asked if she knew how to read. "I was going to ask if you might be interested in helping with the children's reading circle," Catherine explained, her face animated. "We meet Saturday afternoons, and I have more students than I can manage alone. It does not pay anything, but it would be a good way to meet more people in town." "I would love to help." The words came without hesitation, and Lillian realized she meant them. The idea of doing something beyond just working for wages, of contributing to this community that had taken her in, felt right in a way she had not anticipated. Lucas seemed pleased by her easy integration into the social fabric, the way she spoke to people with genuine interest rather than just polite necessity. When the music shifted to something slower, he offered his hand with a question in his eyes. "I should warn you, I am not much of a dancer." "Good, neither am I." Lillian took his hand, feeling the warm roughness of his palm against hers, and let him lead her onto the makeshift dance floor. They moved together carefully, finding their rhythm, and Lillian was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the solid presence of him, the way he smelled like soap and leather, and something uniquely him. They were close enough that she could see the exact pattern of sun lines around his eyes, the small scar near his left temple, the way his gaze kept settling on her face like he was trying to memorize it. "You look real pretty tonight," he said quietly. The words meant only for her. "I mean, you always look fine, but tonight especially." "Thank you." She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warm evening. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He laughed at that, a genuine sound of amusement that made something warm bloom in her chest. "I do try, when the occasion calls for it. Most days I am covered in so much dust you could not tell what color my clothes were supposed to be." "What made you choose ranch work?" She asked the question partially out of genuine curiosity and partially because she wanted to know everything about him, wanted to understand what had shaped him into the kind of man who would give his boots to a stranger. Did not choose it so much as fell into it. "My pa died when I was 16, and my ma remarried quick to a man who made it clear there was not room for me anymore. So I took off with nothing but what I could carry and found work where I could." His voice was matter of fact, not looking for sympathy. "Turns out I am good with horses and cattle, got a feel for it, and the work suits me well enough. I like being outside, like the straightforward nature of it. A cow does not care about your past or where you came from, just whether you treat it decent." "That sounds lonely, though." "It can be," he admitted, "but it is also peaceful. And I got friends at the ranch, got people I trust. That is more than a lot of folks can say." He paused, then added, "Besides, I am starting to think maybe lonely is not the permanent condition I thought it was." The implication in his words made her heart race, but before she could respond, the song ended and another couple bumped into them, laughing and apologizing. The moment passed, but the feeling remained, hanging in the air between them like something tangible. They spent the rest of the evening together, talking and laughing, sharing plates of food and watching other couples dance. Lucas introduced her to his friends from the ranch, young cowboys who teased him good-naturedly about his pretty companion, and told Lillian stories about his skill with horses that made him duck his head in embarrassment. She found herself relaxing in ways she had not thought possible, the constant vigilance that had become second nature finally easing as she allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment. When he walked her back to the hotel as the stars emerged overhead, the night had cooled enough that she almost shivered. Lucas noticed immediately, shrugging out of his jacket and draping it over her shoulders before she could protest. The fabric still held his warmth, and she pulled it closer, breathing in the scent of him. "Thank you for inviting me tonight," she said as they stood outside the hotel entrance, neither quite ready for the evening to end. "I had forgotten what it felt like to just enjoy myself, to not be constantly worried about what might happen next. You deserve to feel that way all the time." His voice was serious, intense in a way that made her breath catch. "You deserve to feel safe and happy and like you belong somewhere. I hope you are starting to feel that here." "I am." The admission felt vulnerable but also necessary. "More than I expected to, honestly. When I started walking 2 weeks ago, I did not let myself imagine what might come after. I just focused on getting away. But now, here with you, I am starting to think maybe I can actually build something. Not just survive, but actually live." Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a moment against her cheek, and the gentleness of the gesture made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met, Lillian Owens." Walking 30 miles in shoes that were falling apart, starting over with nothing, building a new life out of pure determination. That takes a kind of courage most people never have to find. I did not feel brave. I felt terrified. That is what courage is, though. Being terrified and doing it anyway. His hand dropped back to his side, but he stayed close, his presence solid and reassuring. "Can I see you again? I mean, I know we will probably run into each other around town, but can I call on you proper-like? Take you to dinner or for a ride or whatever you might enjoy?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, without the second guessing that usually plagued her decisions. "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across his face was like watching sunrise, slow and warm and full of promise. "Good. That is real good. How about next Sunday if you are free?" "I am free." They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to say goodnight, until finally Lucas took a step back, breaking the spell. "I should let you get some rest. I am sure Mrs. Patterson has you working at dawn." "She does, but it is worth it." Lillian slipped his jacket off her shoulders and handed it back, immediately missing the warmth. "Thank you again, Lucas, for tonight, for everything." "My pleasure." He took the jacket, then touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both old-fashioned and endearing. "Sleep well, Lillian." She watched him walk away into the night, his form gradually disappearing into shadow before finally turning and going inside. Mrs. Patterson was reading in the small parlor off the lobby, and she looked up with a knowing expression that made Lillian blush. "Good evening." The older woman asked innocently, "Very good evening." Lillian could not keep the smile off her face even if she tried. "Lucas Ashford is a good man, one of the few around here worth your time." Mrs. Patterson closed her book and stood up, stretching. "Just do not let it distract you from your work, understood?" "Understood." "Good. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we have a full house checking out and a cattle buyer arriving who expects his room to be perfect, which means extra work for all of us." The weeks that followed established a pattern that became the foundation of something real. Lucas came to town every Sunday, and they spent their afternoons together, walking along the creek where they had first met, riding out to see the prairie in full bloom, attending church services and town gatherings. He was easy to be with, comfortable in a way Lillian had not experienced before. He did not push for more than she was ready to give, did not make demands or expect anything beyond her company. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their futures, observations about the world around them. Lucas told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother and sister, who he still wrote to occasionally, despite the painful circumstances of his leaving. Lillian told him about her own mother, dead these 3 years from fever, and about the father she had adored who had died when she was 14, leaving her at the mercy of a stepfather who saw her as property rather than person. "You ever think about going back?" Lucas asked one Sunday afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching the water flow past. "Not to your stepfather, but just to see the place again, lay some ghosts to rest." "No." The answer was immediate and certain. "That part of my life is over. I spent too long being someone's daughter, someone's burden, someone's problem. Here I get to just be Lillian, figure out who that is without all the weight of expectation and obligation." She paused, then added, "Does that make me selfish?" "No, it makes you smart." He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water, watching it bounce 3 times before sinking. There is no point in carrying around pain just because other people think you should. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away and not look back. "Is that what you did with your family?" "With my stepfather, yeah. With my ma and sister, it is more complicated. I send money when I can, write letters, but I do not go back. Cannot stand to see him acting like he owns them, like he has any right to control their lives." His jaw tightened, old anger surfacing. "But my sister is almost 17 now, old enough to make her own choices soon. I told her she always has a place with me if she needs it. You are a good brother." "I try to be." He looked at her, and his expression softened. "Same way I am trying to be whatever you need me to be. Friend, companion, someone you can count on. I am not real experienced at this, at caring about someone the way I care about you. So if I mess up or overstep, you tell me, all right." The confession made her heart swell, made her brave enough to speak her own truth. "I care about you too, Lucas. More than I plan to, more than I probably should given how little time has passed. But I do. There is no should about it. People do not operate on schedules." He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I think I started caring about you the moment I saw you collapsed by this creek, too stubborn to ask for help even though you desperately needed it. I recognized something in you, something I see in myself. That determination to make it on your own terms, no matter what. And now here we are, 2 stubborn people sitting by a creek, holding hands like a couple of fools." She said it lightly, but her grip on his hand was tight, anchoring, the best kind of fools. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture so sweet it made her chest ache. The kind who found each other when they needed it most. As summer mellowed into early fall, their relationship deepened in quiet, steady ways. Lucas taught her to ride properly, spending patient hours helping her regain confidence on horseback. She taught him to read better, discovering that while he knew the basics, years of ranch work had left him rusty. They would sit in the hotel parlor on quiet evenings, her reading aloud while he listened with complete attention, asking questions about words he did not know, slowly expanding his understanding. The town noticed, of course, because small towns always noticed. But the attention was largely benevolent, people pleased to see the hard-working hotel girl and the reliable ranch hand finding happiness together. Mrs. Patterson gave her approval through a simple nod and a comment about how Lillian should feel free to invite Lucas to dinner occasionally, which was as close to a blessing as the stern woman ever gave. It was on a cool October evening, with the leaves turning gold and red on the few trees that dotted the landscape, that everything changed. Lucas had taken her riding out to a spot he loved, a small rise that overlooked the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. They sat on a blanket he had brought, watching the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and purple, and Lillian felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. "I've been thinking," Lucas started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words in a way that was unusual for him. "About the future, about what I want it to look like." "And what do you want it to look like?" She kept her voice light, but her heart was racing, sensing the importance of this moment. "I want a place of my own, not just working for someone else's ranch, but having my own land, my own house. Maybe not big or fancy, but mine." He was staring out at the horizon, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "And I want you in it, with me. As my wife, if you will have me." The words hung in the cooling air, and Lillian felt time stop, felt the entire world narrow down to this moment, this man, this impossible question. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking if you would consider it. I know we have not known each other long by most standards, only 3 months or so, but I know what I feel, and I know what I want. I want to build a life with you, Lillian. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to watch you grow from surviving into thriving, and I want to be the man who gets to stand beside you while you do it." He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of vulnerability and hope. "I love you. I am pretty sure I have loved you since the moment you tried to refuse my boots even though your feet were bleeding. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I would count myself the luckiest man alive if you said yes." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks before she could stop them, but they were good tears, clean tears, the kind that came from joy rather than pain. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since you sat down in the dirt and took off your boots like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like kindness was just what a person did without thinking about it. Is that a yes?" His voice was rough with emotion, hope warring with fear of rejection. "That is a yes." She laughed through her tears, the sound bubbling up from deep in her chest. "Yes, I will marry you, Lucas Ashford. I will build a life with you, and wake up next to you and be brave enough to choose happiness instead of just safety." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close like she was something precious, and she wrapped her arms around him and let herself feel the full weight of what they had just promised each other. When he finally pulled back enough to see her face, he was smiling wider than she had ever seen, his joy uncomplicated and pure. "I do not have a ring yet, did not want to presume, but I will get you one. Something nice, something worthy of you. I do not need a ring, I just need you." She meant it, though she suspected he would get her one anyway because that was who he was, thoughtful in practical ways. "You will have both." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, his lips soft against hers. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like coming home, like finding something she had not known she was looking for. They were married 6 weeks later in the white steepled church, with most of the town in attendance. Catherine, the schoolteacher, stood as Lillian's witness, and Thomas Atkins stood for Lucas. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row and dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief she would later claim was just for allergies. Lillian wore a dress that Catherine had helped her sew, simple white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Lucas wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortably formal until she saw his boots beneath the pressed trousers and smiled. The ceremony was short and sweet. The Reverend speaking about love and partnership and the sanctity of choosing each other in the face of life's hardships. When Lucas said, "I do," his voice was steady and sure, and when Lillian echoed the words, she felt something settle in her chest, some final piece of herself clicking into place. They spent their wedding night in a small house on the edge of town that Thomas Atkins had helped Lucas buy, a two-room structure with a good stove and a sturdy bed and windows that let in the morning light. It was not much, but it was theirs, bought with saved wages and careful planning, and Lillian loved every inch of it. Lucas was gentle with her, patient, walking her through the intimate unknown with steady hands and whispered reassurances. There was awkwardness, as there always is the first time, but there was also tenderness and growing pleasure, and the profound intimacy of being fully known by another person. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Lillian felt tears slip down her temples, overwhelmed by how far she had come from that desperate girl walking through the dust. "You all right?" Lucas brushed the tears away with careful fingers, concern in his voice. "I am perfect." She turned to face him, cupping his jaw in her palm. "I am just thinking about how different my life is now compared to 3 months ago. How if I had given up, if I had stopped walking, I never would have found you. Good thing you are too stubborn to give up then." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "And good thing I happened to be riding by that creek at exactly the right moment. You think it was fate. I think it was luck or grace, or whatever you want to call it when things work out despite all the odds saying they should not." His arms tightened around her. "And I think we should be grateful for it every single day and never take for granted how rare this is, what we have. I promise I will not take it for granted. Ever." They kept that promise through the years that followed, through the hard Oklahoma winters and brutal summers, through drought years and good years, through all the small struggles and large joys that made up a life. Lucas proved to be as good at building a future as he was at giving away his boots. He saved carefully, worked hard, and within 2 years had bought enough land to start his own small ranch, running cattle alongside 2 hired hands who became friends and eventually partners in the enterprise. Lillian continued working at the hotel for the first year of their marriage, saving her wages to buy supplies and furniture for their growing home. But when she discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1887, Mrs. Patterson insisted she stop working so hard, and Lucas agreed with such fierce protectiveness that Lillian had to laugh even as she gave notice. She stayed on part-time, helping with the ledgers and special events, but her focus shifted to building the home they had dreamed of. Their first child was born in January of 1888, a boy they named James after Lillian's father. He came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold winter air, and Lucas held him with such tender wonder that Lillian fell in love with her husband all over again. Watching him with their son, seeing the gentleness and patience he brought to fatherhood, only confirmed what she had known that first day by the creek, that Lucas Ashford was a good man, the kind worth building a life around. A daughter followed 2 years later, named Ruth after Lucas's mother in a gesture of reconciliation that led to careful letters and eventual forgiveness. Then another son 2 years after that, then twin girls who arrived unexpectedly and kept them both running ragged for the first year. The house expanded with their family, additional rooms added as Lucas's ranch prospered, and they could afford the lumber and labor. Lillian discovered she had a talent for breeding horses, an eye for bloodlines and temperament that made their stock sought after throughout the territory. She built a small business alongside Lucas's cattle operation, trading and selling horses that she trained herself. It gave her independence within their partnership, her own contribution to their shared success, and Lucas encouraged it with the same unwavering support he had shown from the beginning. Oklahoma Territory became Oklahoma State in 1907, and they celebrated with the rest of Tulsa, watching the town grow from rough prairie settlement into a real city with brick buildings and paved streets. Their children grew up in this changing world, attending the school where Catherine still taught, playing with other ranch children, learning to ride and rope and read with equal facility. Lucas never quite lost the habit of going barefoot around their property when the weather was warm, claiming his feet had never forgotten those 5 miles he walked home the day they met. Lillian kept his old boots, the ones he had given her, in a box under their bed. On their 10th anniversary, she had them professionally restored and mounted as a display, a reminder of kindness freely given and a life transformed by one simple act. Sometimes, when their children asked how they met, Lucas would tell the story of the girl who walked 30 miles in shoes full of holes, too stubborn to ask for help until she collapsed by a creek. And Lillian would add the part about the cowboy who gave her his boots and walked home barefoot, like it was nothing, like kindness was just what a person did. And their children would listen with wide eyes, understanding even in their young hearts that this story was special, was the foundation everything else was built on. On their 25th anniversary, surrounded by their 5 children and 3 grandchildren, Lucas took Lillian back to the creek where they met. It looked different now, with more trees planted along the banks and a small bridge crossing the water, but the essence remained the same. They sat on the bank, their bodies older but no less vital, and watched the water flow past just as it had all those years ago. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked, his hand finding hers automatically. Saying yes to a dusty cowboy with more hope than sense, not for a single second. Lillian leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him that had been her constant for a quarter-century. "You gave me more than your boots that day. You gave me a future when I did not think I had one. You gave me a home and a family and a love I did not even know was possible. I think you gave all that to yourself. You walked 30 miles to claim it. I just happened to have good timing." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "But I am glad my timing was good. Cannot imagine what my life would have been like if I had ridden past that creek an hour earlier or later, if I had missed you entirely. We would have found each other somehow." Lillian said it with quiet certainty, the kind that came from years of building something strong. "Some things are just meant to be." Maybe so. Lucas stood up, then offered his hand to help her rise, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "Come on, we got a party waiting for us back at the house, and you know how impatient the grandchildren get about cake." They walked back toward their home hand in hand, the setting sun painting the Oklahoma sky in those same shades of orange and purple they had watched together so many times before. The prairie stretched out around them, still harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, but they had made a place for themselves within it, carved out a life through determination and love, and the simple act of choosing each other every single day. Their house rose in the distance, lights glowing warm in the windows, voices and laughter spilling out into the evening air. This was what they had built from nothing, from a moment of kindness and a willingness to believe that better things were possible. Lucas had given Lillian his boots and walked home barefoot, and she had accepted that gift and used it to walk toward a future neither of them could have imagined. Years later, when Lillian was old and her children gathered around to hear stories of the past, they would ask about that day by the creek, about the moment that changed everything. And she would tell them about exhaustion and desperation, about bleeding feet and 30 miles of dust, about a cowboy who saw someone who needed help and offered it without hesitation or expectation of reward. But more than that, she would tell them about love that grew from kindness, about partnership built on mutual respect, about choosing each other through hard times and good times and all the mundane moments in between. She would tell them that sometimes the most extraordinary things came from the simplest gestures, that generosity could change the trajectory of a life, that being willing to go barefoot so someone else could have shoes was the kind of love worth building everything on. And when she finally passed, surrounded by the family she and Lucas had created, her last thought was of that creek, that moment, that choice that became the foundation of everything good in her life. She thought of Lucas sitting in the dirt pulling off his boots, of his creek stone eyes full of compassion, of the feeling of worn leather against her damaged feet, and the knowledge that someone cared whether she made it or not. Lucas followed her 6 months later, as if he could not bear to be separated for long, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch. Their children placed a marker there that read simply, "She walked 30 miles. He gave her his boots." Together they walked the rest of the way home. The story lived on through generations, told and retold, becoming part of family legend and town history. The boots themselves, carefully preserved, eventually made their way to the Tulsa Historical Society, a reminder of when Oklahoma was still territory, and kindness could be measured in worn leather, and barefoot walks home. But more than the physical boots, what endured was the truth they represented. That sometimes the most profound love stories begin not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with simple acts of human decency, with seeing another person suffering and choosing to help despite personal cost. Lillian had walked 30 miles in shoes full of holes, running from a past that tried to claim her. Lucas had given her his boots and gone barefoot, offering help without strings attached. And from that one moment of grace, they built a life that spanned decades, that created a family, that proved love could grow from the smallest seeds if given fertile ground and careful tending. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the story, understanding it as a lesson about kindness and courage, and choosing to see the humanity in strangers. The creek still ran clear and cold outside Tulsa, and sometimes couples would go there on anniversaries or first dates, drawn by the romance of the legend. They would sit on the banks and imagine a dusty cowboy pulling off his boots, a desperate young woman accepting them with tears in her eyes, and the beginning of something that would outlast them both. Because that was the truth at the heart of the story, that Lucas and Lillian had not just found love that day by the creek. They had found partnership and purpose, had found the strength that comes from facing the world together rather than alone. The boots were just leather and thread, but what they represented was the willingness to sacrifice comfort for another's need, to see beyond self-interest to compassion, to believe that some things mattered more than keeping your own feet protected. And in the end, that was the legacy they left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a large family or a place in local history, but the example of what it meant to love selflessly, to build carefully, to walk through life with someone who would give you their boots and go barefoot if that was what you needed. It was a love story for the ages, born in the harsh Oklahoma prairie and tempered by all the challenges the West could throw at it. And it endured because it was built on the strongest foundation possible: simple human kindness and the courage to accept it when offered. The Wild West was full of stories of gunfights and gold rushes, of outlaws and lawmen and dramatic showdowns. But the story of Lillian and Lucas was a different kind of Western tale, quieter but no less powerful, about two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to build something beautiful from that chance encounter. It was about walking through pain until you found help, about offering that help without conditions, about love that started with boots and ended with a lifetime of walking together. And every time someone heard the story, every time they pictured that scene by the creek with the dust and the heat and the simple act of compassion, they understood a little better what it meant to truly love another person. Not the easy love of good times and favorable circumstances, but the hard love of sacrifice and choice, and showing up day after day, even when it would be easier to walk away. Lucas had shown Lillian that kind of love from their very first meeting, and she had spent the rest of her life returning it. And together, they proved that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start with someone asking, "What do you need?" and then providing it without expecting anything in return. Their story became a touchstone, a reminder that heroism did not always look like violence or bravery in battle. Sometimes it looked like a cowboy sitting in the dirt removing his boots. Sometimes it looked like a young woman finding the courage to accept help and build something new. Sometimes it looked like two people choosing each other every day for 50 years, through droughts and winters and all the small struggles that threatened to break them. But they never broke. They bent sometimes, weathered hard seasons, faced challenges that tested them. But the foundation they built on that first day held strong, and they walked together all the way home, just like the marker said. And in doing so, they created something that outlasted leather and thread, and even their own lives. A story of love that began with kindness and never forgot where it came from, that honored the moment a stranger became the most important person in the world, that proved sometimes the simplest gestures carry the most profound meanings. Lillian had walked 30 miles in shoes full of holes. Lucas had given her his boots and gone barefoot. And from that single act of compassion grew a love that shaped families and communities and became legend, reminding everyone who heard it that kindness matters, that seeing and responding to another's need is never wasted, and that the best things in life often come from the moments when we choose someone else's well-being over our own comfort. That was their legacy, their gift to the future, and it lived on long after the prairie wind had erased their footprints from the Oklahoma dust.